Guess what this show is about? Windows. You know, every once in a while a word gets stolen from the English language, and from that point onward, it takes on a totally different meaning. Say the word Windows to a guy with one geek gene in him, and he thinks you're talking about Microsoft Windows. Today, we'll show you a sneak preview of Windows 95. Plus, we'll look at the competition, the new Warp OS 2 from IBM and System 7.5 for the Apple Macintosh. Windows 95 and more on this edition of the Computer Chronicles.
Computer Chronicles is made possible in part by Hewlett-Packard, working with industry leaders to ensure compatibility across the board and across the network. HP PCs, you're looking at partnership in a whole new light.
The Computer Chronicles is also made possible by the Software Publishers Association, providers of educational materials to help manage software. Don't copy that floppy.
Welcome to the Computer Chronicles. I'm Stuart Chaffee. With me today is Paul Schindler, Northern California editor of Windows Magazine. Paul, we're talking about Windows 95 today, the new version of Windows. It's hard to believe it's actually, in 95, going to be the 10th anniversary of the introduction of Windows. It came out in 85, right?
That's correct. And it took a long time to catch on. Now, there was Windows 1 in 85. This is Windows 2 from 1987, the MS-DOS Executive. That's the way you got into it.
Yeah.
Clearly a version that presages Windows 3, a lot of the same applications, Paint and Clock and Notepad, but cruder, less adjustable, and slower. All in all, it just wasn't quite the revolutionary application that Windows became with version 3 in 1990.
Well, that's the question I have for you. Windows is so hot now. I mean, it is the platform around the world, yet when it first came out in 85, it took 5 years before anybody paid attention to it. Why?
Well, there were two problems. First of all, there's a psychological problem. There was a feeling that real men don't use mice, and that stood in the way of the graphical user interface on the PC side. But more importantly, Microsoft was on the cutting edge. They were pushing the capabilities of a 286 with Windows 1 and 2, and the platform simply wasn't sufficient to support what they wanted to do. When 386s became common in the early 1990s, finally, there was a platform that provided Windows the space and the speed it needed to become a reasonable performer.
So you needed the CPU, you needed the RAM?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it wasn't only the software problem, partly was waiting for the hardware to catch up.
That's correct.
Okay, today we'll show you some of the features of the newest version of Windows. It's been getting rave reviews, and you'll get to see why. Before we show you Win95, let's take a look at the interface Windows is always compared to, and that's the Macintosh, of course. The newest version of the Mac OS is System 7.5.
Without the Macintosh, black and white desktop publishing of Cupertino, California would be hard-pressed to meet its deadlines. The Mac is still the favorite of graphic artists, and the simplicity and uniformity of the interface has a lot to do with its popularity.
Author and all-around PC expert Larry. Windows 95 is, after all, just an operating system and a user interface, but the launch of the product was choreographed more like a Hollywood movie premiere than a software title. In case you missed it, here's what it was like in Redmond, Washington, the day Windows 95 was finally released.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jay Leno.
No, it's not The Tonight Show. Bill Gates invited Jay Leno to launch Windows 95 at this Hollywood-style event at Microsoft headquarters.
Well, Windows 95 is so easy, even a talk show host can figure it out.
Okay, you got your taskbar. Let's go right down there. Little taskbar there. You can click on there. You see, and I can change my mind. Do I go over here? This one too. I can change my mind faster than Bill Clinton. Look at that, huh? Healthcare, no healthcare. Republican today, Democrat tomorrow. Sure, there you go. Just flip it back and forward. Back and forward. Easy as pie-ola. That's a technical term.
There were video testimonials by corporate users as well as home users.
I tape the CD, put it in, click it on the computer, and the big circle comes, and then the bird comes.
Members of the audience were pulled backstage to upgrade from Windows 3.1 to Windows 95 during the gala. The site was connected via satellite to an audience in an amusement park in the Silicon Valley, and the now widely recognized Start Me Up commercial previewed here. The big screen came down to reveal the development team. The audience made its way past them to the circus tents filled with more than 300 applications developed for Windows 95. For the Computer Chronicles, I'm Giles Bateman.
Now, you've all heard the horror stories about what you're going to have to spend to run Windows 95. More RAM, bigger hard drive, new keyboard, maybe a processor upgrade. Let's try to figure out what you really do need to run the new version of Windows. Here to help us out, a syndicated columnist, author, and all-around PC expert, Larry Magid. Welcome, Larry.
Thank you.
Before we get to the toys here, let's talk about installing Windows 95. What should you do to your PC before you start to install it?
Well, the first thing you should do is back up. At very least, back up your important data files, because those you can't replace.
Because you can never tell what's going to happen during that install.
Absolutely. You never know, even though most of the time it goes fine.
Okay.
The next thing you want to do is get rid of any viruses you might have. Make sure you've got a nice, clean system. Disable any of your TSRs or anything that's kind of, quirky, so that when the Windows 95 installation program starts running, it's got a fairly vanilla, ordinary system to deal with. Then, after you've done all that, make sure you've got plenty of space in your hard drive, because that's critical, because Windows 95 is going to use every nook and cranny you've got.
All right, let's talk about that now. First of all, let's talk RAM before we talk hard drive, and we hear that you really can't run Win95 if you have a 4-megabyte machine, right?
In theory, you can, but then a family of 4 could live in a one-bedroom apartment, theoretically. In reality, whatever the rules were for Windows 3.1, you double them. The rule, Windows 3.1, 4 megs minimum. Windows 95, for all practical purposes, 8 megabytes is your minimum system. If you want a really nice system with plenty of room to grow, 16 megabytes is really excellent. That's what I use. If you're a heavy power user and you've got a lot of CAD/CAM or big graphic images, then you probably want to go to 32 megabytes. Believe it or not, that's what the power users are doing these days.
Let's talk about the RAM upgrade options, and we have a couple of them over here. First of all, this PC MCIA card, and I guess if you have a laptop and you have a PC slot, you can just stick that in and
Absolutely.
get more
If you
RAM.
get an extra slot and you can afford it, that's a great, easy way to do it.
Okay, now sometimes you don't have a slot, and I guess these are sort of little mini SIM chips.
Right, they fit in the, usually there's a little door in the back of your laptop, and you turn it off and plug those in. They're pretty easy to install, and they do the job.
And for the typical desktop user, you've got your regular PC. This is the normal.
Right, you can get up to 16 megabytes of memory on one of these little, they're called a SIM modular, and they just plug right into the motherboard, and they're fairly easy to install. If you know how to take your computer apart, if you're comfortable, you can do it yourself. If you're not, it's a 10,
Let's do that right here. We have a PC open, and we'll just lift this power supply and get it out of the way. And these are your RAM slots right in here, right?
That's right, and you'd have an empty one, and you just pop it in there and clip it down and turn on the machine. If all goes well, you've got to do
it's
memory.
not too, you don't have to be afraid to do that.
No, the only thing is make sure you touch the chassis to discharge any
Yeah.
electricity, static you may, before you touch one of these components. Other than that, you're fine.
Let's get back to the hard drive issue you mentioned. Windows 95 takes up a lot of space on your
Absolutely.
hard drive. Most of us don't have a lot of space left over on our hard drive. What are the options then to get more hard drive space?
Well, of course, you could always buy another hard drive,
Right.
and eventually you can do compression. But the main thing you want to do, it's like cleaning out your garage. You probably have more space than you realize, because you probably have a lot of junk on your machine, programs that you haven't used in months. Go ahead and delete them, and then you get into the issue, how do you delete them? Well, if you really know what you're doing, you could delete them manually. But even if you took out the directory that all the programs are in, there's always extra files sitting around. There's always statements
Certainly
in
if
your
you had
Win files.
Win 3.1 on your machine.
Especially with Win 3.1. So that's where we have all these commercial uninstall programs. Now, sort of the mother of all uninstall programs is called Uninstaller for MicroHelp. And we
Can
actually
you have that up here now?
have it running here. And what we're doing here is we're actually in the process of looking at a program that we want to get rid of. We want to get rid of, let's say, not that we would want to get rid of ClarisWorks. We'd click on this, we'd push Analyze, and then the program would start analyzing what it has to do, and it would go ahead and not only delete the files, but clean up the WinINI program file and just get the machine so it's as if that program were never there. Now, eventually, you're not going to need this because Windows 95 has an uninstall program built in, but it only works with Windows 95 applications. So for the present time, you're really going to need a program like this. Eventually, it's going to be an operating system
When you want to
function.
install Win96, you'll have the problem solved with Win95.
Exactly.
All right, last thing we hear, there are special keyboards out now for Windows 95, and we have one of them over here. And show me what's so special about this. Why might I want a separate keyboard for Win95?
Well, you don't need a separate keyboard. I mean, you can function fine without one.
But we got, for instance, here's this little funny Windows key over here. What does that do?
If you're buying a keyboard, you get one of these and you push it, and what it does is it brings up the start menu. It's just like if you'd press the start menu. So it just makes it easier. And there's another one over on this side.
And what's that little Windows
button? Well, it's programmable. If it's just Microsoft, it does the same thing. But in this particular one, it actually brings up a special task switching menu to make it just easier to change tasks. And then we have another one here, which is the same as pushing the right mouse button, which, well, here we go. It brought up another little window, just as if you'd pushed the right mouse